We go from the future of Texas, talk a little bit about the history of Texas. We're talking about the Texas Symposium all week long, and we've got Jim Haley, novelist and historian, and a gentleman I visited with years ago back in Amarillo, and also James Harkins with the GLO, who's been in all week, or it will be in all week, talking about what's coming up here. So many interesting topics, one of which, Jim, is the history back in the 1800s of the Texas Supreme Court.
Right. Yeah, when I first got into the project, I had no idea. The rich legal history, because we just think of court decisions that come down. But Texas came out of Spanish law, not American law, and some of the early justices were very adamant that we have protections under Spanish law that you would lose. In America, they had debtors' prisons. In Texas, we had Ferdinand and Isabella's decree. They can't come take everything you had. And so in the United States at that time, if you lived in Tennessee or Alabama, if you had it made there, you stayed there. And losers came to Texas, people who were flea and debt collectors, and they couldn't cross the river. And the court made sure that you couldn't lose your homestead. Women had community property protection. I was stunned.
It's interesting, and it's interesting to think about the Supreme Court of this state in a time period where it went from its own, under Mexico, to its own country, to the state. I mean, the landscape around it was changing so much. That's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, in fact, there was one Chief Justice, I assume we'll get to the photographs, John Hemphill, who bridged the Republic into statehood. And yeah, conditions were changing very quickly.
We are looking at some pictures.
There he is, that's John Hemphill. Now, he was a very interesting character. He was one of the driving forces. He let free African Americans and slaves come into court when they really didn't have. And in Texas, and a lot of people don't know this, slaves could even sue for their freedom. And sometimes they won.
Wow.
We were by far the most liberal state in the South on that score.
It's an interesting point, James, and I know it's why you're trying to put it on here, the symposium, bringing parts of history that we've really maybe overlooked or forgotten about for decades.
Right. The Save Texas History Symposium, this is actually the 6th year that we've done it, and every year we've tried to talk about some of the lesser-known stories in Texas history. And I think this year we're really doing a good job of getting diverse topics about Austin's history specifically during the 19th century, from talking about the Supreme Court, which, no offense, not everybody knows about, but that's what you're there to talk about, to even the slave narratives of local Austinites in the freedmen's towns and things like that. And people don't always realize that there's a lot more backstory than what they have always been taught in school. And that's what we're trying to do at the symposium.
And you can't hear the whole or know the whole picture if you don't have that whole story. Like you said, the political climate in the state.
Right. Now,
who had rights, who didn't.
This picture here, that's right. This is what they call the consensus court about 100 years ago. The guy in the center there is Chief Justice Gaines. He was a very interesting character. Back then, yeah, there he is, Gaines. Very scholarly, very erudite, very polite. Well, there was that time he chased a waiter out of the Driscoll Hotel with a carving knife. But,
other than that, we all have a bad day.
But it was called the consensus court because in 11 years they had, I think, 4 dissenting opinions because they all saw the law the same way. But they were willing to, and remember, this is a long time ago. Corporations hadn't really been reined in yet as far as abusing their power. And there was no law. There were no cases. And they would make decisions favoring little people, little landowners, consumers, and they'd say, well, there's no law, there's no precedent, but this is the right thing to do.
So, wow. So in some ways you think some of these gentlemen time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we were not such a red state then.
Of course, makes you wonder what was going on. Also, just get back to the Driscoll Hotel that one day.
Right.
He really lost his mind there.
Yeah. Oh boy, where do we start? The guy on the right, he's one of my favorite guys, James Hall Bell. He was the first Harvard man, the first native-born Texan on the Supreme Court, and he was a Unionist. And he didn't get reelected to the court because he was a Unionist. And when he went home to Brazoria County to vote in the referendum to secede from the Union, they gave him a ballot, and it was pre-printed for secession. And they had no secret ballot back then, and he had to scratch out for and write in against. And there was an armed poll watcher said, now, Judge Bell, I'm real sorry to see you do that. You're going to regret it. And we wonder why people voted for secession when there was such a strong sentiment to stay in the Union.
Yeah, and you can contrast that with the events today on Election Day, how different things were back then. Again, just a little bit of history that you will get into in much greater detail at the symposium coming up on the 14th. All day long. And again, it's just such an important thing to learn about the history of the state, whether for your entertainment, but really so we know the whole history of the state and how we got to where we are. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
You betcha.
We will continue the discussion about the symposium going throughout the week as well. And when we come back, we've got Trinity Tuesday, so don't go away.